I planned my cheating fiancé's dream wedding.
Just not with me.
I never thought I'd be writing this story, but here we are. My name is Emma, and I'm a wedding planner. I've orchestrated over 200 perfect days for couples who believed in forever. I thought I'd found my own forever with David. I was wrong, but that mistake led to the most satisfying professional project of my career. David and I met 3 years ago at a mutual friend's wedding that I was coordinating. He was the best man, charming and confident in his navy suit, making everyone laugh during his speech. After the reception, he found me cleaning up and insisted on helping, even though he was still wearing his expensive suit. We talked until sunrise about dreams and futures, and I fell hard for this man who seemed to respect my work and ambition. Our relationship moved fast. Within 6 months, we were living together in my downtown apartment. David was a pharmaceutical sales rep who traveled frequently, which I initially appreciated since my work often kept me busy on weekends. He made good money and wasn't intimidated by my success, something I'd struggled with in previous relationships. When he proposed after 2 years, with a stunning ring he claimed he'd saved months to afford, I said yes, without hesitation. The proposal was perfect, or so I thought. He'd arranged for us to return to the venue where we met, claiming he wanted to show me some updates they'd made. Instead, I found the garden decorated with fairy lights and our friends and family waiting. He got down on one knee right where we'd had our first conversation, and I cried happy tears as everyone cheered. It felt like the beginning of my own fairy tale. We set our wedding date for the following October, giving us 8 months to plan. As a wedding planner, I was excited to finally design my own perfect day. David seemed equally invested, attending venue tours and tasting appointments. He had opinions about everything from the flowers to the music, which I found endearing. Most grooms I worked with were happy to let their brides handle the details, but David wanted to be involved. The first red flag should have been his insistence on handling the guest list entirely himself. He claimed he wanted to surprise me with how many people he could gather to celebrate us, but looking back, he was probably trying to control who would be there. I was busy with 3 other weddings that spring, so I was grateful for his help and didn't push for details. The second red flag was his sudden interest in my client roster. David had never shown much curiosity about my work beyond general support, but suddenly he was asking detailed questions about upcoming weddings, particularly the more expensive ones. He claimed he was just proud of how successful I'd become, but something felt off about his newfound enthusiasm. The third flag, and the one that should have knocked me over, was his phone habits. David had always been fairly open with his phone, occasionally handing it to me to answer calls while he was driving or asking me to respond to texts while his hands were busy. But around April, that changed completely. The phone was suddenly password protected, and he became possessive of it in a way that felt foreign to our relationship. I rationalized everything. The guest list control was him being thoughtful. The questions about my work were support of interest. The phone protection was just him being more professional as he'd recently been promoted to regional manager. Love makes you stupid, and I was deeply in love. The truth revealed itself on a Thursday in late May. I was working on a timeline for a June wedding when I realized I'd left my portfolio at David's office from when I'd stopped by earlier to show him photos from a recent event. His office was only 10 minutes away, and I knew his assistant Jennifer well enough to ask her to grab it for me. When I called the office, Jennifer sounded confused. "Oh, Emma, David's not here. He's been in Chicago all week for that big conference. Didn't he tell you?" My blood went cold. David was supposed to be in Chicago, but he'd been coming home every night. He told me the conference got moved to next month due to scheduling conflicts with the pharmaceutical company they were courting. I'd even asked about it just that morning, and he'd complained about how the delay was affecting his quarterly goals. I hung up with Jennifer and immediately called David. It went straight to voicemail. I tried 3 more times with the same result. Finally, I texted him asking about dinner plans, something casual that wouldn't reveal I discovered his lie. He responded within minutes, saying he was stuck in meetings but would be home by 7 with takeout from our favorite Thai place. That afternoon dragged by like a year. I couldn't concentrate on work, couldn't eat, couldn't think about anything except the growing certainty that my fiancé was lying to me about something big. At 6:45, I heard his key in the door, and he walked in with a bag from Thai Palace, looking tired but normal. "How was Chicago?" I asked casually while he unpacked the food. "Exhausting. These pharmaceutical executives are demanding, but I think we made good progress." He launched into a detailed story about presentations and client dinners that sounded rehearsed. He'd always been a good storyteller, but this felt different. Too polished, too prepared. I played along through dinner, asking follow-up questions that he answered smoothly. Either he was telling the truth and Jennifer was mistaken, or he was a much better liar than I'd ever imagined. The knot in my stomach suggested the latter. After he fell asleep, I did something I'd never done before in our relationship. I went through his things. I started with his laptop, which was password protected, then moved to his dresser drawers, looking for anything that might explain the discrepancy. I found nothing unusual until I checked the pocket of the suit jacket he'd worn earlier. Inside was a hotel receipt from the Marriott downtown. Not the conference hotel in Chicago, but our local Marriott, 15 minutes from our apartment. The date was from 2 days earlier, and it showed checkout at 2 p.m. The room had been occupied for 2 nights. I sat on our bedroom floor holding that receipt, trying to construct an innocent explanation. Maybe he'd booked it for an out-of-town client. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe there was a rational reason my fiancé had been staying at a local hotel while lying about being in another city. But deep down I knew. That sick feeling in your stomach when you realize someone you love has been deceiving you. It's unmistakable. I'd seen it on the faces of brides who discovered their fiancés had been unfaithful. I'd held their hands while they decided whether to go through with weddings to men who'd already broken their trust. I'd always wondered how they hadn't seen the signs earlier. Now I understood. Love doesn't just make you stupid, it makes you willfully blind. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I lay next to David planning my next move like I would plan a wedding, thinking through every detail and contingency. By morning, I had a strategy. First, I needed more information. One hotel receipt wasn't enough to confirm an affair, and I wasn't going to blow up my life over a misunderstanding. Second, if my suspicions were correct, I needed to protect myself financially and emotionally before confronting him. Third, I needed to be smart about this. David was charming and manipulative. If I gave him warning, he'd find a way to turn this around on me. I called in sick to work, something I rarely did, and began my investigation. I started by visiting Jennifer at David's office, claiming I wanted to surprise him with lunch later in the week and needed his schedule. She was happy to help, pulling up his calendar and confirming that he had indeed been scheduled for Chicago but had canceled last minute due to a family emergency none of his colleagues knew about. He seemed really stressed about it, Jennifer confided. Kept getting phone calls that he'd take outside. We all figured it was something serious with his parents, but he didn't want to talk about it. David's parents lived in Florida and were perfectly healthy, as confirmed by their recent Facebook posts about their cruise vacation. Next, I drove to the Marriott. I'd planned enough events there to know the staff, particularly Maria, the catering manager who'd helped me coordinate several receptions. I found her in her office and asked if we could chat privately. "I need a favor, and it's personal," I told her. "I think my fiancé might be having an affair, and I found a receipt from here. I just need to know if there's anything you can tell me about his visits." Maria looked uncomfortable, which I understood. Hotel staff aren't supposed to discuss guests, but she'd worked with me for 3 years and knew I wasn't the type to cause drama without cause. "I can't give you specific information," she said carefully, "but I can tell you that if someone was concerned about a guest's activities, they might want to know that our parking garage has security cameras and our restaurant keeps reservation records." It was more help than I'd expected. I thanked her and left, my mind racing with possibilities. The parking garage cameras were a dead end. Without security access, I didn't have, but the restaurant records were promising. I returned that evening during the dinner shift and spoke with Carlos, the manager I'd worked with on several rehearsal dinners. "I hate to ask this," I began, then explained my situation. "I just need to know if David Martinez has been making reservations here recently." Carlos disappeared into the back office and returned with a printout. "I'm sorry, Emma. He's been here 4 times in the past month, always with the same guest. The reservations are under his name, but for 2 people, always requesting a corner booth." My heart sank, but I needed to be thorough. Can you tell me anything about his guest? Blonde woman, very well dressed. They seemed close. I'm really sorry to have to tell you this. I thanked Carlos and walked to my car on unsteady legs. 4 dinner dates in a month while lying about business trips. The evidence was mounting, but I still needed absolute confirmation before taking action. That confirmation came sooner than expected. The next morning, David announced another conference, this time supposedly in Atlanta for 3 days. I helped him pack, kissed him goodbye, and waited exactly 30 minutes after his departure to put my plan into motion. I called the Marriott and asked about availability for that weekend, claiming I was planning a surprise for out-of-town friends. The reservation system showed David Martinez had already booked a room for 2 nights, checking in that afternoon. This was it. The proof I needed. But instead of confronting him immediately, I decided to get one final confirmation and see exactly what I was dealing with. I spent the day at my office, trying to work, but mostly planning my approach. At 6 p.m., I drove to the Marriott and positioned myself in the lobby bar where I could see both the elevator and the restaurant entrance. I ordered a glass of wine and pretended to read emails while keeping watch. At 7:15, I saw David walk through the lobby. He wasn't alone. The woman with him was stunning. Blonde, tall, impeccably dressed in a way that screamed money. She was laughing at something he'd said, her hand on his arm in a gesture so intimate it made my stomach turn. They moved toward the elevators like a couple, comfortable and familiar with each other. I recognized her. Her name was Victoria Ashford, and she was the bride from one of my most expensive weddings the previous fall. She'd married Jonathan Ashford, heir to a hotel chain fortune, in a ceremony that cost more than most people's houses. I'd spent 6 months planning every detail of their perfect day, and David had attended as my plus one. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. David's sudden interest in my client list. His questions about upcoming expensive weddings. His presence at Victoria's wedding, where he'd charmed everyone with his stories and jokes. He'd been using my work to target wealthy, married women. I sat in that lobby bar for another hour, nursing my wine and processing the betrayal. This wasn't just infidelity, it was calculated and predatory. David had turned my career, my passion for creating beautiful moments for couples, into his hunting ground for affairs. When I finally left the hotel, I wasn't heartbroken anymore. I was furious. The drive home gave me time to think, and by the time I reached our apartment, I had a plan. Not just for ending our relationship, but for giving David exactly what he deserved. I was a wedding planner. I knew how to orchestrate perfect events down to the smallest detail. It was time to plan the most important event of my career. Over the next few days, while David continued his charade in Atlanta, I gathered intelligence like a military operation. I researched Victoria Ashford's marriage, her social media presence, her husband's business interests. I compiled a timeline of David's lies and deceptions. Most importantly, I began designing the perfect revenge. David returned from his fake business trip on Sunday evening with gifts and stories about the conference. He seemed relaxed and happy, probably because he thought he'd successfully managed both his fiancé and his mistress without detection. He even suggested we look at wedding venues that weekend, claiming his trip had reminded him how excited he was to marry me. I smiled and agreed, then spent the night lying awake beside him, refining my plan. Monday morning, I started making phone calls. The first was to Jonathan Ashford's office. Getting through to a busy executive wasn't easy, but I leveraged my professional reputation and claimed I needed to discuss concerns about an upcoming event I was planning for his wife. His assistant scheduled me for a brief call that afternoon. When Jonathan answered, I was direct. Mr. Ashford, my name is Emma Chen, and I planned your wedding last fall. I'm calling because I've discovered something about your wife that I believe you should know. There was a long pause. What kind of something? The kind that's better discussed in person, if you're willing to meet. I have documentation that I think you'll want to see. We agreed to meet the following day at a coffee shop near his office. The second call was to my own wedding venue. I'd booked the Riverside Manor for October, a beautiful estate with gardens that would photograph perfectly. I called the event coordinator and asked about availability for a different date. Actually, I'd like to move our wedding up significantly. Are you available this Saturday? She sounded surprised. That's very short notice, Emma. Is everything all right? Everything's perfect. I just can't wait to marry David, and we've decided we want something more intimate than originally planned. Maybe 30 people instead of the 150 we discussed. After some juggling, she confirmed they could accommodate the change. The venue, flowers, photographer, and catering were all available due to a last-minute cancellation. It was almost like the universe was supporting my plan. The third call was the most important. I phoned my mentor, Patricia, a legendary wedding planner who taught me everything about the industry. She'd retired 2 years earlier, but still consulted on special projects. Patricia, I need your help with the most important wedding I've ever planned. It's complicated, and I'll need to explain everything, but I promise it will be worth your time. We met that evening at her home, and I told her the whole story. Patricia listened without interruption, her expression growing more intrigued as I outlined my plan. You want to throw your cheating fiancé a wedding, she said when I finished. Just not the wedding he's expecting. Exactly. And I want it to be perfect. Every detail flawless. Every moment choreographed. The kind of wedding that people talk about for years. Patricia smiled, and I recognized the expression. It was the same look she got when facing a particularly challenging event that required all her skills to execute. When do we start? The meeting with Jonathan Ashford was brutal but necessary. I showed him everything, the hotel receipts, the restaurant reservations, photos I'd discreetly taken of David and Victoria together. Jonathan sat across from me in that coffee shop, looking like a man watching his world collapse. How long? He asked quietly. At least a month that I know of, probably longer. I'm sorry, Mr. Ashford. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear. He stared at the photos for a long time. We've been married 8 months. We're supposed to go to Europe next month for our first anniversary. I'm sorry, I repeated, because what else could I say? Jonathan looked up at me with eyes full of pain and anger. What do you want from me? Money to keep quiet. The question stung, but I understood his suspicion. I don't want anything from you except for you to know the truth. What you do with that information is up to you. He gathered the photos and documents. Why are you telling me this instead of just confronting your fiancé? I smiled, and it wasn't a nice expression. Because I am going to confront him, in a way he'll never forget. And I thought you might want to be there when I do. That's when I told Jonathan about the wedding. By Wednesday, the pieces were falling into place beautifully. The venue was confirmed, the flowers ordered, the photographer briefed on the unusual nature of the event. Patricia had reached out to her network of vendors, many of whom were intrigued by the challenge of pulling together a high-end wedding in 4 days. David was completely unsuspecting. He'd returned from his fake business trip more attentive than usual, probably feeling guilty about his deception. When I told him about moving up the wedding date, he seemed surprised but pleased. Really? This Saturday? That's so soon. I know it's sudden, but I realized I don't want to wait anymore. I want to start our life together now, not in 5 months. Plus, Patricia offered to help coordinate everything as a favor, and you know how expensive her services usually are. David's eyes lit up at the mention of Patricia's reputation. If Patricia's involved, it's going to be incredible. But what about our families? Can they make it on such short notice? I've already called everyone important. Your parents are flying in Friday morning, and my family is so excited they're driving up Thursday night. It's going to be intimate and perfect. What I didn't mention was who else I'd invited. Thursday evening, David's parents arrived from Florida, confused but delighted by the sudden change of plans. My own family was equally puzzled but supportive, trusting that I knew what I was doing. I'd told them all the same story. David and I had decided we couldn't wait, and we wanted a small, romantic ceremony instead of the large affair we'd originally planned. That night, David and I had dinner with both sets of parents at our favorite restaurant. He was charming and happy, talking about our future with such conviction that I almost admired his acting skills. He even toasted to the beginning of our perfect life together. I smiled and clinked glasses, thinking about how right he was. It would indeed be perfect. Friday was controlled chaos, exactly like every wedding day I'd ever coordinated. Patricia and I arrived at the venue at dawn to oversee setup while David spent the day with his groomsmen, believing he was preparing for the happiest day of his life. The Riverside Manor looked stunning. Patricia had outdone herself with the flowers, creating romantic arrangements that photographed beautifully. The weather was perfect, clear and sunny with a light breeze. Even the caterers commented on how smoothly everything was coming together. At noon, I got a text from Jonathan Ashford. "I'll be there. Thank you for this." At 2 p.m., Victoria texted David. "I know because I was monitoring his phone through a tracking app I'd installed days earlier. Can't wait to celebrate with you tonight, darling." At 4 p.m., I retreated to the bridal suite to get ready, finally allowing myself to feel nervous. Not about the plan, which I knew would work perfectly, but about the moment when everything came together. There would be no going back after night. Patricia found me sitting in front of the mirror, fully dressed but not yet ready to face what was coming. "Second thoughts?" she asked gently.
No.
But I keep thinking about how much I loved him, how excited I was to marry him for real. It's strange to feel heartbroken and vindicated at the same time. "Honey, you're not destroying a real marriage today. You're revealing that there never was one to destroy. David made his choice when he decided to lie to you. You're just making sure he faces the consequences." She was right as always. At 5:30, I received confirmation that all the guests had arrived. David's family, my family, our mutual friends, and a few special additions to the guest list that only Patricia and I knew about. At 6 p.m., the music began. I walked down the aisle to David on my father's arm, looking every inch the radiant bride. The venue was decorated perfectly, the lighting was magical, and David looked handsome in his black tuxedo. For a moment, it felt like the wedding I'd always dreamed of. David's face when he saw me walking toward him was everything I'd hoped for. Pure joy, love, anticipation. He believed this was the beginning of his perfect life, where he'd have a successful, beautiful wife who would provide him with social connections and financial stability while he continued his affair with wealthy married women on the side. The ceremony began beautifully. Our officiant, a friend of Patricia's who specialized in unique wedding situations, welcomed everyone to celebrate the union of David and Emma and the beginning of their honest life together. David didn't catch the word choice. The vows were traditional until we reached the part where I was supposed to promise to forsake all others. Instead, I pulled out a different piece of paper. "David," I said, my voice clear and strong, "I promise to always be honest with you, the way I wish you had been honest with me. I promise to never lie about where I'm going or who I'm with, unlike some people. And I promise that after today, you'll never have to worry about disappointing me again, because this is the last day I'll ever expect anything from you." David's smile faltered slightly, but he still didn't understand what was happening. When it was his turn, he gave the traditional vows, promising to love and honor and forsake all others. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Then came the moment I'd been planning for weeks. Before we exchanged rings, the officiant said, "Emma has prepared a special presentation for David and all their loved ones, sharing the journey that brought them to this moment." Patricia dimmed the lights and activated the projector screen we'd set up beside the altar. David turned to look, probably expecting a romantic video montage of our relationship. Instead, the first image that appeared was a hotel receipt from the Marriott. David's face went white. The presentation continued with restaurant receipts, screenshots of text messages, and photos of David with Victoria at various locations around the city. Each image was displayed long enough for everyone to understand what they were seeing, accompanied by a timeline showing how David's lies had escalated over the months. The final slide was a photo of David and Victoria entering the hotel elevator together, time-stamped from just 4 days earlier, while he was supposedly in Atlanta on business. The audience sat in stunned silence. David's mother gasped audibly. My father stood up, his face dark with anger. "Emma," David whispered, reaching for me. "This isn't what it looks like." I stepped back from his outstretched hand. "Actually, David, it's exactly what it looks like." And there's more. That's when Patricia opened the back doors of the venue. Victoria Ashford walked in, escorted by her husband Jonathan. She looked confused and elegant in a cocktail dress, clearly having expected to attend a wedding celebration, not her own public humiliation. Behind them came Jennifer from David's office, Carlos from the restaurant, and Maria from the hotel. The people who could confirm every detail of David's deception, all of whom had agreed to attend after I explained the situation. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced to the frozen audience, I'd like you to meet Victoria Ashford, the woman my fiancé has been having an affair with for the past several months. Victoria, I'd like you to meet David's parents, his family, and all the friends who thought they were coming to celebrate our wedding. Victoria's face went from confusion to horror as she realized what was happening. She looked at David, then at her husband, then back at the assembled crowd of wedding guests who were staring at her with a mixture of shock and disgust. "This is insane," David said, his voice rising. "Emma, you've lost your mind. This is our wedding day." "You're absolutely right," I replied calmly. "This is our wedding day. The day when we promised to be honest with each other. So let me be completely honest. I know about all of it, David. The fake business trips, the hotel rooms, the expensive dinners. I know you've been using my client list to target married women. I know you've been planning to continue the affair after we got married." I turned to address the stunned guests. "I'm sorry you all had to witness this, but I thought it was important for everyone who loves David to understand who he really is before they continue supporting him." David's father stood up slowly. "Son, is this true?" David looked around the room at all the faces staring at him, his family, his friends, the woman he'd been cheating with, and her husband who was watching with cold satisfaction. "I can explain," he said weakly. "Please do," I said. "We're all listening." But David couldn't explain. How do you explain months of calculated deception to a room full of people who believed in you? How do you justify using your fiancé's career to prey on other marriages? Jonathan Ashford stepped forward. "I think I can help explain," he said quietly. "David, you've been having an affair with my wife. You've been lying to her, telling her you're single, while lying to your fiancé about your whereabouts. You're not just a cheater, you're a predator who targets vulnerable married women." The room erupted. David's mother started crying. My father moved toward David with murder in his eyes before my brothers restrained him. Victoria tried to leave, but the crowd blocked her exit. In the chaos, David grabbed my arm. "Emma, please. We can fix this. I love you. I made a mistake, but we can work through this." I looked at him, this man I'd planned to spend my life with, and felt nothing but pity. "David, you didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. Actually, you made hundreds of choices over the course of months. Every lie, every hotel room, every dinner with another woman while I was home planning our wedding. Those weren't mistakes, they were decisions." I pulled off my engagement ring and placed it on the altar between us. The wedding is over. The marriage never began. And we're done. Patricia, ever the professional, stepped forward with a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, while this ceremony hasn't concluded as originally planned, we do have a beautiful reception prepared. I invite David's family and friends to stay and enjoy the evening, and to use this time to process what we've all learned today. Emma has asked me to announce that she bears no ill will toward anyone who is deceived by David's actions." What followed was the strangest wedding reception in history. About half the guests left immediately, unable to handle the drama. The other half stayed, partly out of loyalty to me and partly out of morbid fascination with the situation. David tried several more times to approach me, but my brothers and father formed an effective barrier. Eventually, he left with Victoria, both of them retreating in the face of universal condemnation. Jonathan Ashford approached me during the dinner service. "Thank you," he said simply. "I know this was about your situation, but you saved me years of marriage to someone who doesn't respect our vows." "I'm sorry it had to happen this way," I told him. "Don't be. You gave me the truth, and you did it with more class than most people would have managed." As the evening wound down, Patricia found me on the venue's terrace, looking out over the gardens where I'd imagined taking my wedding photos with David. "Any regrets?" she asked. I considered the question seriously. About David?
No.
He made his choices and I made mine. About the method? Maybe. It was dramatic, and drama isn't usually my style. Honey, some situations call for drama. You could have confronted him privately, and he would have denied everything. You could have broken up quietly, and he would have moved on to his next victim without consequence. Instead, you made sure everyone who cared about both of you understood the truth. She was right. The nuclear option had been necessary. The aftermath was swift and decisive. David's parents, humiliated by their son's behavior, reached out to me personally to apologize and express their support. His friends, most of whom I'd known for years, made it clear they sided with me. His professional reputation suffered when word spread through his industry about the affair and the public humiliation. Victoria and Jonathan divorced within 2 months. Jonathan was generous in the settlement, but Victoria's reputation in their social circle was destroyed. Word spread quickly through the wealthy circles where she'd been a prominent figure. David tried to contact me several times in the weeks following the wedding, alternating between apologies and anger. I blocked his number, his email, and his social media accounts. When he showed up at my office, I had security escort him out and filed a restraining order. 3 months later, I heard through mutual friends that David had moved to another city and taken a job with a different pharmaceutical company. Apparently, his reputation in our town had made it difficult for him to rebuild his client base. As for me, the wedding gained legendary status in the planning community. Within weeks, I was getting calls from potential clients who'd heard about the event and wanted to hire the planner who'd orchestrated such a perfectly executed revelation. My business doubled, then tripled, as word spread about my attention to detail and commitment to truth. More importantly, I'd learned something valuable about myself. I was stronger than I'd realized, and I deserved better than someone who would use my love and trust as cover for his deceptions. 6 months after the wedding, I got an unexpected call from Carlos at the restaurant where David had taken Victoria for their secret dinners. "Emma, I thought you should know. That guy, your ex-fiancé? He came in here last night with a different woman. Same routine, corner booth, very intimate. I thought maybe you'd want to warn her." I thanked Carlos for the information, but I didn't reach out to David's new victim. I'd done my part by exposing him to the people in our shared life. What he did after that was no longer my responsibility. Instead, I focused on rebuilding and moving forward. I sold the apartment David and I had shared and bought a small house with a garden where I could grow my own flowers. I threw myself into my work, creating beautiful weddings for couples who genuinely loved and respected each other. A year after the wedding, I met someone new. Marcus was a photographer I'd worked with on several events, and he knew my whole story before we even went on our first date. He thought my handling of the David situation showed strength and integrity, not vindictiveness. "You didn't ruin his life," Marcus told me early in our relationship. "You just made sure he had to face the consequences of his choices. There's a difference." Marcus was right, but more importantly, he was honest. Transparently, completely honest in a way that felt revolutionary after David's deceptions. When he traveled for work, he sent me photos of his hotel rooms and restaurant meals. When women flirted with him at events, he told me about it. When we disagreed about something, he addressed it directly instead of letting resentment fester. 2 years after the disaster wedding, Marcus proposed. Not at a venue where we'd met, not with a crowd of friends watching, but on a quiet Tuesday evening in my kitchen while I was making dinner. He'd been helping me chop vegetables when he suddenly got down on one knee beside the kitchen island. "Emma," he said, holding up a ring box, "I love your honesty, your strength, and your ability to plan the perfect event. Will you plan the rest of our life together?" I said yes, and we had a small, genuine wedding 6 months later. Nothing dramatic, nothing designed to make a point. Just 2 people who loved each other, surrounded by family and friends who supported their happiness. The wedding was beautiful, but the marriage has been even better. Looking back on the whole experience with David, I don't regret how I handled it. Could I have taken the high road and confronted him privately?
Yes.
Would that have been more mature and less vindictive?
Probably.
But would it have been as effective at preventing him from hurting other people the same way he hurt me? Absolutely not. Sometimes the nuclear option is the right option. Sometimes people need to face public consequences for their private betrayals. And sometimes, the best revenge isn't just getting even, it's making sure everyone understands exactly who they're dealing with. David taught me that love without honesty is just an illusion. The wedding I planned for him taught me that I was strong enough to demand better for myself. And that lesson was worth every moment of drama it took to learn it.